Okay, so I'm going to start out this time by talking about something that, it's kind of related to what I got all bogged in and down in at the end last time. Uh, I'm not going to try to reconstruct that though, but I'm just going to start talking about this from scratch and maybe you'll see how it's related. So what I want to talk about first, and maybe this is not the obvious thing to talk about when the reading was about the non-existence of the material world. You might think that would be the most important thing, but actually I'm going to start talking about language or signs and how that works according to Berkeley. Yeah, I see where that green marker is not lovely. There's another one that's better. Another blue marker. Okay, so there are two kinds of relationships you might think that all the signs in a language have to stand in. And the first one is, so like here are the signs in the language. They're like words and stuff, sentences, whatever. So one kind of relationship you might think they have to stand in is there have to be rules according to which they are associated with each other. So for example, if these were words, then there would be rules according to which, about what order they can come in a sentence. What word can come where, right? So, these are basically what we call grammatical rules, or, what we call grammatical rules are a subset of these. So what order words can come in a sentence, but also, for example, what sentence you're allowed to write down as the conclusion given certain premises. And I'm going to use so these were rules about how these signs can associate with each other. Actually, let me not write this yet. But the other kind of rule you might think that every sign in a language has to fall under is a rule by which, or rules by which the signs in the language are associated with the things we talk about in the language. So, for example, if this is a name, then it has to somehow be associated with the thing that it's a name of. Right? Whereas this one's associated with thing 1, and this one's associated with thing 2. Right? Or again, if you're talking more broadly, you might ask, what's the relationship between a sentence and what the sentence talks about? Between the sentence and what makes the sentence true or false? And other things like that. Rules about what the signs of the language refer to. Right? So the contemporary names for these two types of relations or rules are syntax and semantics. Right? Syntax is rules about how the signs of a language are associated with each other, whereas semantics is rules about how the signs of a language are related to the things they stand for or refer to or are about. So, okay, why am I introducing this? Well, recall that at least the way I understood Locke, when we talk about a word, which Locke usually has spoken language in mind. That's what he's usually talking about, even though, of course, he's not talking, he's writing. So what he's using is written language. But anyway, when you think about a word, that is an audible idea. Boy, my lips really seem to be out of sync with the sound. Oh well, not what I could do about that. Locke thinks the relationship between the word in that sense, the sound idea, and the idea that it signifies, right? So like between the sound white and the idea of white, that relationship is it's a relationship of, so to speak, it's based on the fact that we're allowed to entertain one of these ideas when we get the other. And so it's a kind of grammatical rule, and remember that I said that according to Locke, those rules are rules of what's allowed in addition to the grammatical rules between word ideas, the relationships between sound ideas and the ideas they stand for is literally a relationship of, or it has to do with what we're allowed to do or what we're required to do in a strict ethical and political sense, right? That is, we are bound to, it's not just a habit that we get the idea of white when we get the idea of the sound white. It's actually like a convention that we've bound ourselves to by consent, at least implicit consent. So this kind of relationship, according to Locke, between the sound white and the idea of white is a syntactic relationship, is the way I tried to explain it. It's not the sound white is somehow refers to the idea, is about the idea. The sound white is a reliable symptom of the idea, or a reliable, that is, it's a reliable symptom of the idea in the speaker, and it's a reliable cause of the idea in the listener, but not because they're naturally associated with each other, but rather because we've both consented in common to these rules, and that's what makes us speakers of the same language. Now, on the other hand, according to Locke, now this actually, thinking about it again this year, I'm a little less sure I want to say this. I think I still want to say it. An idea, according to Locke, on the other hand, refers to the quality that causes it. It's about the quality that causes it. Now, or it's what allows the operation of the mind to be about the quality that causes it. That's definitely right about what Descartes calls ideas. I'm a little bit... But look, it's not... So here's the operation of the mind. You might say, well, no, this is also just a reliable symptom of this, right? We use this as a sign that this is here because this caused it. But you see, that's not sufficient because it's not like sometimes we see this on its own and it's not like we see this on its own and then we compare it to the idea. We can only think about this at all because we have the idea, right? We can only think of this by means of this idea. So that's why I think that these are actually completely different kinds of relationship. And this is the semantic relationship of what the idea refers to or allows us to refer to. So, and what I want to say about Berkeley in general is that I'm going to qualify this a little bit later, but at least to begin with, we can say Berkeley doesn't believe in semantic relationships. He only believes in syntactic relationships. So he doesn't believe that ideas are ideas of anything, or could be ideas of anything. In this semantic sense, he thinks that an idea could be an idea of something in the sense that one idea goes together with another idea according to some rule. So there's like a grammar of ideas by which if you see one idea, you can predict which one might be coming next. Just like if you see one word in English, you can predict what possible words can come next. But there's no semantic relationship by which either the idea itself or we, by means of the idea, can refer to something other than the idea. So this came up last week. So again, I'm not going to get, I think it's basically the same thing I was trying to explain, the issue of the idea of triangle. How, according to Locke and Berkeley, the idea of triangle can function as a universal, and yet a particular idea of a particular triangle can function as a universal, and yet what the difference is between that function according to Locke versus according to Berkeley. But let me talk about names instead. So, so according to Berkeley, okay, let me put it this way. So according to Locke, if we have general names, it must be because they're associated with general ideas. And the general ideas are general because, so I mean, that's the syntactic relationship, right? This sound, white, is associated with a general idea, the abstract idea of white. And the abstract idea of white refers to anything white, or to the power to cause white as it could exist in anything, or something like that. And that's how the sound becomes general. But Berkeley says, no, you don't need a general idea, you just need the general name. And the general name can stand for any number of different particular ideas. So here, stand for is the purely syntactic relationship. It means that somehow, for this sound white, we're able to substitute, or at least, I mean, the actual rules here have to be really complicated, right? Like, it's not like you actually think of something white every time you hear the word white, or, I mean, it's complicated. But somehow we're allowed to interchange this idea. This is the idea of the sound white, I should make clear. Right? Because, like, according to Locke, there's also a physical process you could call the sound white. Like vibrations in the air or something. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the idea in the mind of the sound white. So, according to Berkeley, all we need is a rule according to which we can interchange this idea with any number of particular ideas of white things. For example, a white circle, a white triangle, a white house-shaped thing, etc. So how do we use this general name to think about things in general? I mean, if just every time we got it, we went straight to some particular white thing, then that still wouldn't enable us to form universal propositions. And Berkeley agrees with Locke and everyone else that most of our knowledge, or the interesting part of our knowledge, or something like that, it consists of universal propositions, right? Like all snow is white, or something like that. So how can we so much as think things like that if every time we use this sound, it has to be associated with some particular idea of some particular white shape? So what Berkeley said about that and this is still back in the introduction. So this is section 19 in the introduction. Names being for the most part used as letters are in algebra, in which, though a particular quantity be marked by each letter, yet to proceed right, it is not requisite that in every step each letter suggests to your thoughts that particular quantity it was appointed to stand for. So this is a particular understanding of how algebra works that Berkeley has in mind. And the way it works, I mean, so I think, I mean, you can think of it like this. Like, suppose I write that no, see, good example. Yeah, I'm going to choose a really simple example because I think that's the kind Berkeley is thinking about. So suppose I write x plus 1 equals 3. And now I say right? I subtract 1 from both sides, and I get x equals 2. Now, the way Berkeley is thinking about this is something like this. X always had to mean some particular number, right? That is, we can't add 1 to number in general. That doesn't make sense. So x meant some particular number. Now, I mean, I'm still not sure I have as simple a case as Berkeley has in mind, actually, because, I mean, because the weird thing here, of course, that at the beginning I don't know which particular number it stands for. But I think the point is that I guess you can think of it this way, at least by the time I get to the end, I know that x always stood for 2 in all the steps. So what good is this writing this x in here if it turns out I should have written 2? I mean, that's a weird way to think about it, but the answer is not bad, and maybe the answer can be, I think the answer can be adapted, you know, to make sense of more usual uses of algebra. And the answer is that although it turns out that x is supposed to stand for 2, Now, like to begin with, you can think of that as a semantic relationship, even though that's not what Berkeley is going to think. He doesn't believe in any of these semantic relationships. But to begin, think of that as a semantic relationship. So that symbol X is actually supposed to be about the number 2. But I don't need to know that to go through these steps. All I have to do is know the rules for manipulating these symbols. And I know that if I follow those rules for manipulating the symbols, at the end, I'll be able to find a number I can plug in for 2, and it will make all the statements true. But I can do that without, like the whole use of algebra is that I can do that without, at every step, knowing which number it is. I just know it's some number, and then I use these rules to manipulate the symbols. So the sign X, right, so the sign X as I use it in these steps here is significant. It means something, but according to Berkeley, not because it refers out of the language to something else, but because the rules I have for proceeding right guarantee that in the end I can replace it by a sign for a specific quantity. I guess, so maybe I shouldn't have said think of this as semantic. The point is think of this as syntactic too. When you get to this stage, what it tells you is that everywhere you had X written before, you can write 2 now if you want. What still looks semantic here is we're thinking that 2, on the other hand, isn't like that. The 2 actually is about something, the number 2. But in fact, according to Berkeley, 2 is also just like this. And all our general names are like this. So 2 is something that's going to allow me, according to certain rules, to substitute 2 ideas. 2 particular ideas. But anyway, forgetting that for a second, so the point is the reason X is significant is not because it refers to something other than any particular number, or to all the particular numbers put together, or something like that. It's rather because it has this syntactic relationship to other signs that allows you in the end to substitute a significant sign for it, and that makes the X itself significant. Right, so Berkeley says that that general names are also like this. So if we look back at his explanation of how general names work, so this is section 11 of the introduction on page 12. But it seems that a word becomes general by being made the sign not of an abstract general idea, but of several particular ideas, any one of which it indifferently suggests to the mind. Right, so the explanation of how there can be general names is that the general name, so like X in this example, we could fill in any number we want for it. But a general name is a name that, according to certain rules, you can substitute some ideas for and not others. I shouldn't say, in this example, we can only substitute 2 for x. But the symbol x by itself we can use for anything, right? But a general name is a name where there's rules about what particular ideas you can substitute for it in certain contexts. So, for example, the general name triangle is an idea of a certain sound or mark. And we have some rules for manipulating sounds and marks like that. And we also have a rule for this particular type of sound or mark, the sound triangle, let's say. We have a rule that in the end, so to speak, at the beginning or at the end, you can use any idea of a certain kind, and you can interchange it with the idea of this sound. Right? So in other words, so like what might happen is something like this. I have, this is my mind, and this is time. So first I have the idea of a triangle, some particular triangle. It has a particular shape, size, and color. But then I exchange it for the idea of the sound triangle. And then I do some manipulations with this sound and other sounds according to some rules I know. And I come out with some big sound that contains the sound triangle in it. Right? Like, so it could be the idea of the sound, the interior angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees or something like that. And then afterwards, according to rules like this, but in reverse, I can take some other idea of a triangle, any particular idea of a triangle, of a different shape, size, and color, and interchange this sound for that. So now I have a sentence, and then if I do the same thing to the other sounds in the sentence, I have a complex idea, which is the idea that the angles of this, interior angles of that triangle add up to 180 degrees. And all that happened here, there wasn't any thinking about triangles in general. All there were rules for switching particular visible ideas for particular sounds, manipulating those sounds, and then going back to other particular visible ideas. So it's all syntactic. Now, there's one question that this raises, and the question that this raises is, so I'm not just going through this to clarify some stuff about last time. The question this raises is kind of a key question concerning Berkeley's metaphysics of ideas and spirits. So here's the question, or at least the answer to it involves some fundamental things about the metaphysics of ideas and spirits. So the question is this. Suppose this is a particular triangle I've never seen the like of before. So it's a new particular idea that I don't remember. How do I know whether it agrees with this word or not? That is, how do I know whether I can apply this rule or not? So I can't tell, right? So here I have this sound in my mind, the idea of the sound triangle. And I have this other idea in my mind, which is a particular shape. And I want to compare them with each other to see if one of them agrees with the other. So I obviously can't do it by comparing this shape with the word directly, because the word is an arbitrary sign, right? It could have been biangle instead of triangle. And yet it would have, if the word had been biangle, then biangle would have agreed with the shape and triangle wouldn't have, right? So it can't be anything about the idea of the sound that is the word. So what is it? Well, could I possibly do it by remembering something that this word has stood for in the past and comparing it with that, right? So like remembering this shape and comparing this shape with that shape. Well, it seems like the result might well depend on which particular shape I pick from the ones that it stood for in the past. I mean, what guarantee is there that it won't? Right? So the word triangle might, depending on which previous triangle I remember, it might or might not apply to this shape. Right? Because again, this is just a matter of picking some particular, random particular thing that happened to agree with this. And then, since this relationship is arbitrary between this and this, all I'm left with is comparing these two shapes and asking, are they similar? And my answer might depend on which one this is. So it seems like, and this is a typical objection to Berkeley, to Berkeley's theory of abstract ideas. The objection is something like this. It seems like a general word can't have this syntactic value unless there's something else somewhere that really is general, right? Like somewhere in my mind, I've represented a universal rule for determining whether something's a triangle or not. And I had to already have that in place before I could even adopt the rule of substituting shapes like this for that sound, right? Because I had to already have a way of telling whether a shape was a shape like that or not. So, do people understand that so far? Are there questions about this? Oh, this is kind of weird. Okay. I think up until now it wasn't recording actually. But fortunately I had Manycam recording it, so I still should have that recording. All right. But in case not, I'll have a partial recording. Okay. But I don't know why, because it's still set to automatically record to the local computer. I posted this on Facebook, and I heard from some other people are having the same problem, that sometimes it just doesn't record their lecture, and they don't know why. All right. In any case, okay. But so let me go back and ask, are there questions about what I was just saying about what Berkeley's view is, apparently, and yet what the objection is to it, apparently, about general names? So I think the answer, according to Berkeley, is that, yes, there really is something that's really general. But the thing that's really general is not an idea. There are no general ideas. So what is general? Well, so what's general in this case is a principle of the will. That is, what's general is a state of the active power of what Berkeley would call a spirit. So, so what happened here, when I said this is my mind, that was kind of a wrong picture according to Berkeley. My mind isn't just this like line along which some ideas are strung. That is going to be basically Hume's view, but that's not Berkeley's view. And my mind isn't just kind of a string with a bunch of ideas along it. My mind is that substance, the active, powerful substance in which these inert ideas inhere as their subject, and which also has a limited but real important power to cause itself to have such ideas. Right? So at least some of these ideas are not only inhering in this. So, right, this is like the subject accident relation, where this is the accident, or mode. What is mode? Right? This idea is a mode or accident of this substance, and this substance is a spirit. But in some cases, also, in addition, so this subject accident or subject I should say substance accident. This substance accident relation holds for all the ideas in my mind and all ideas in general, right? According to Berkeley, every idea is the mode of some mind or spirit. He uses the two terms interchangeably. But it's also the case that some of the ideas in my mind are also caused by me. So this is a cause-effect relation. Now, I mean, like, if this is a perception, if I actually saw a triangle at this point, then what that means is that in this case, I didn't cause the idea, right? It came to me against my will, or at least without any regard for my will, involuntarily. But this kind of thing, where I think about it, is an example of where Berkeley says that the spirit causes those ideas in itself, right? Those are voluntary ideas. So, so what happened here in this transition is that there was a universal principle of my will to always treat ideas like this as interchangeable with this sound. And that's where the true generality lies. Okay, but now coming from Locke, remember that Locke always says that words have to stand for ideas. That's how they get their meaning. Now we just said that the thing that really contains the general principle here is it does have generality, but it's not an idea. How can we talk about it if it's not an idea? How can we talk about anything that's not an idea? So, So in one sense, Locke and Berkeley agree what it is we can talk about other than ideas. Namely, we can talk about the powers to cause ideas, right? Right, because in Locke, we can talk not only about the immediate object, but by way of it, we can talk about the external object or the internal object, which is another operation of my own mind. In a way, Berkeley and Locke agree, yeah, there's something you can talk about that's not an idea, namely what causes the idea. But the difference is that, according to Berkeley, in a sense, that's all we ever talk about. Now, hold on a second, right? I seem to have just switched completely to thinking that according to Berkeley, all we could ever talk about was ideas, to saying, according to Berkeley, all we can ever talk about is spirits and the powers of spirits. But again, this has to do with this distinction. And this is why I said I was going to qualify my claim that Berkeley doesn't believe in semantic relation. He does believe in it, only what all signs signify in that sense is the will of a spirit. Right? So what all signs signify in a syntactic sense, if anything, is ideas. But they don't have to signify anything in a syntactic sense, according to Berkeley. Right? So remember, Berkeley said, it doesn't matter if we associate the sound with an idea as long as, and the as long as could be summarized as long as it still expresses our will. Right? So this syntactic relation that the sound has to other ideas is useful for certain purposes, and I'm going to talk later about what the purpose is that it's useful for. So it's very important function of language that it has this, that the marks of sounds in language have these syntactic relationships to other ideas. But ultimately, that's not the essential function of language. The essential function of language is that these should be marks to express our will. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about, in a kind of introductory way, about signs and language. Are there questions about that before I go on? Because now I am going to talk about, I guess, the big issue, which is Berkeley's idealism. Did someone actually use the word "tis" in the chat? I just noticed that. "Tis hard to think." All right, sorry. Okay. Odds bodkins. All right. I'm going to go on to talk about idealism. But I mean, I hope you can see why I thought that introduction was necessary, because one of the hard things you get into right away is the question of how you can say anything about the relationship between ideas and spirits. And what the basic claim is that that's all you can say anything about. In a strong sense of say something about. All right, so okay, Berkeley's idealism. Berkeley is most famous for his idealism, and is most famous for everyone claiming that their idealism isn't Berkeley's stupid idealism. So everyone who introduces idealism is then careful to explain how they're different from Berkeley. I can't say I like Berkeley as much as I like Locke. either as a person, which he seems kind of unpleasant. I mean, for all I know, he's a perfectly nice guy, and it's just his written persona that's unpleasant. But anyway, nor do I find I like him as much as a philosopher as I like Locke, but he's not stupid. Still not stupid, so I'm going to try to do my best to make something of his views. All right, so, I mean, I think the worst thing you could say about him probably is not that he's stupid, but that he makes Locke out to be stupid by systematically misinterpreting him. But maybe even that's not fair. All right, well, in any case, So to understand what his view is, you have to first of all start with this basic relationship between substances and their accidents or modes. Now, at the beginning of 100B, when I teach it, I actually spend a long time, well, not a long time, but like a week and a half, introducing some of the traditional Aristotelian discussions of this doctrine about substances and their accidents or modes. Oops. I don't know if I've ever talked about it systematically this year in this course. We saw a lot about it in Locke, of course, and we're continuing to see a lot about it in Berkeley. I mean, you know, a substance is like, Descartes defines substance as what is not in need of anything else for its existence, right? It's something that, so to speak, exists on its own. And then accidents or modes are things that can't exist on their own, but only as properties of a substance. And the prime example of that for Locke is a power. Right? Powers, we know, can't exist on their own. Therefore, they must be powers of something. And Locke says, even though we don't have a general positive idea of substance, we have the relative idea of whatever it is the powers are in, because the powers can't be on their own. So Berkeley's basic thought here is actually not that different from that. So the first part of this is that I'm not even going to comment on that. I don't know if they could hear it.
You're welcome, guys.
You could say that if they were in 5th grade, they would be appreciative. All right. So an idea, according to Berkeley, is just obviously something that couldn't exist on its own. This, right, like he says this, for example, on page, bottom of page 51. Part 1, section 73. So he's talking about the origin of the view he opposes, namely that there are material substances, and he says this is how it started out. First, therefore, it was thought that color, figure, motion, and the rest of the sensible qualities or accidents did really exist without the mind. And for this reason it seemed needful to suppose some unthinking substratum or substance wherein they did exist, since they could not be conceived to exist by themselves. And that was part 1, section 73. Right, so now why this is so obvious is maybe not that clear, but in any case, that is supposed to be obvious. Ideas can't exist on their own. They're accidents or modes. What are they accidents or modes of? Well, so I mean, implicit in the way I've been discussing this, implicit in Descartes' definition, I think Avicenna was the first one to say this. No, maybe not, but I think Avicenna was the first one to say this explicitly. Implicit in this is that substance and accidents are like different modes of being. I guess you could say that's in Aristotle. Depends how you look at it. But anyway, substance and accidents are different modes of being. They're different senses in which something can exist, basically. Existence of a kind that can exist on its own is a completely different kind of existence from existence of a kind that can only be in something else as its property. So when we say ideas are things that obviously can't exist on their own, we're saying that they have a mode of being which consists in inherence in something else. And Berkeley says their mode of being is to exist in a perceiving mind. Right? So that is, it's not only obvious that they can't exist on their own, but Berkeley says if you pay more attention, as those people in the quote didn't, I guess, you'll see that the way it's obvious they can't exist on their own is that their very manner of existence is to exist in a perceiving mind. So, this is, I think, is where it's going to become, or where it is important in the background, that one of the places where Locke disagreed with Berkeley, or Berkeley disagreed with Locke, was about the abstract idea of existence or being in general. Right? Berkeley thinks there is no such idea. So we can't take being away from this and attach it to something else. We can't take an idea of being away from this and attach it to something else. All right, so anyway, that's the case with ideas. So then the third step here is that this is the only kind of inexistence this is the only kind of inexistence, of inherence, of substance-accident relation that we understand. Now, what understand means here, that's where the stuff I was talking about before is going to come in, right? Because what we have to understand here is the relationship between an idea and something that isn't an idea, namely a spirit. And if you ask Berkeley, well, how can we understand that? The answer is going to be, well, we know what the words mean. We know what the word, what the sentence, an idea exists in a spirit means. We know what it means we are able to use it to express our will. Okay, but skipping over that for now, so this is the only kind of in existence we understand, and therefore, this is the conclusion. We can't conceive of an idea or anything like an idea existing outside a mind. And by outside, maybe I should just say not in a mind. So, right, this is the strong idealist conclusion. It says that the ideas we actually have, like color ideas, sound ideas, shape ideas, and so forth, can't also exist somewhere else. I mean, they could exist in another mind, but they can't exist also not in a mind. And since nothing that's like an idea can exist not in a mind, they can't resemble anything that's outside of minds. Right? So, like Locke, whether Locke agrees or disagrees with the first point depends on how you understand Locke. But as I understand Locke, he agrees, right? So when Locke says that the primary qualities like shape and solidity and so forth also exist outside the mind or something like that, he doesn't mean that those ideas that are in a mind are also in bodies, but he means that something that resembles them is in bodies. And that's what he usually says. So, right, but the point is, so what's important for Berkeley is to rule out both of those. Like, people don't normally claim the first one, but he rules that out first, but people often claim the second one, so he wants to be sure to rule that out. And I guess, again, if you go back to this point here, like you can kind of understand where this nothing like an idea can exist outside the mind comes from. For it to be like an idea but exist outside the mind, it would have to have something in common with my idea, but not its mode of being. So we would have to be able to take the two apart. The qualitative or structural or some feature of the idea, take it apart from its mode of being. And that maybe, again, is an instance of the kind of abstraction, those limited kinds of abstraction that Locke says are possible and Berkeley says are not possible. Okay, so I think this is basically the argument for idealism. Now, I mean, it's the argument not in the sense that you necessarily should find it convincing because, like, all of these things need more explanation and justification, but this is the way his thought process runs. Okay, other questions about that? And as usual, not going nearly as fast as I should, and I'm wondering what to skip now. Okay, so yeah, I think I'm just going to keep going from here in my notes. Try to go more quickly, but I don't know how I can. All right, so so the important thing to understand about this idealism is idealism is normally opposed to realism. That is idea or idea is opposed to race. So so if you're oops. Oh, that's not good. So if you have this radical idealism, you might think that that would mean that you think you're against realism. That is, you think there are only ideas and not things. But of course, Berkeley wants to deny that. He wants to deny that because, remember, thinking back, the way, like, the general posture of his philosophy here is that one of the things he's claiming to do is to save common sense from these abstruse scholastic wranglings and meaningless jargon, right? So you can't claim to be defending common sense if you go around saying there are no things. So, okay, so it's not versus realism. Somehow, idealism still allows a contrast between things. And so there's different ways he expresses this contrast. One, which is confusing, is when he says things versus ideas, more properly speaking. Right, by which he means that in its broad sense, idea covers both of these, but that it also has a specialized meaning that only refers to these. That is, to ideas that aren't also things. But maybe, well, this also has its problems, but he also sometimes opposes things to chimeras, right? Of course, a chimera actually is some kind of animal that has like the head of, I don't remember what it has, but anyway, it's one of those fantastic animals. It doesn't really exist, so it's a stand-in for an imaginary creature or any ideas merely of the imagination. So Berkeley wants to emphasize that he can still draw a distinction between ideas that are things and ideas that are not things, or that is, ideas that are real and ideas that are not real. He also uses thing in a broader sense, which is even more confusing, right? I mean, actually in two broader senses. One we saw at the beginning where he said that any time that we take certain simple ideas that always accompany each other and give them one name as they occur together, then we call that a thing, right? But that could be, you know, that's true of chimera, for example, as well as of horse. He also uses thing in a very broad sense in which it stands for both ideas and spirits. So that's very confusing, but I just want to focus on this use of thing here now, or of real, and say Like, what is the distinction for Berkeley between real ideas and ideas that are not real, that are mere figments of the memory or imagination? There are three criteria that he lists. So the real ideas, okay, I don't know how to draw this, but maybe I should erase most of this. Otherwise it's going to get confusing. Actually, I'll erase all of it. Real ideas are stronger than the unreal ideas. They're more strong or lively. I was going to write these in a different order, but I don't think it matters. Number two, the real ideas are not subject to my will, right? So whereas the imaginary or unreal ideas are, at least to some extent, subject to my will, I can get them to come and go away. The real ideas are not subject to my will. If I, open my eyes in the daylight, I can't help but see, as his example. Pretty much the same as Descartes' example about this. And finally, the real ideas are more regular. Of course, the unreal ideas have some order that they come in. Sometimes it's a pretty strict order, like when I'm thinking out a demonstration. Other times it's kind of a really free order, like when I'm just daydreaming or whatever. They have some order they come in, but compared to the real ideas, Berkeley says, their order is pretty loose. The real ideas are strictly regular. We'll see Hume raising some issues about that, but to begin with, you can see what he means, basically, right? Like, like I can imagine letting go of this pen and the pen floating up in the air instead of falling, but if I actually see myself letting go of the pen, it will definitely fall, right? So the train of real ideas is more regular than the train of unreal ideas. And there's one other piece here, which is that somehow this seems to be connected to this. Right, Berkeley says, this is, actually, I'm not going to use the document viewer for this because it's very short. I'll just say, Berkeley says this is in section 30 of part 1, that the real ideas are, quote, not excited at random as those which are the effects of human wills often are. Right? So the ones that are effects of human wills tend to be, I mean, maybe it's actually kind of supposed to go with both of these too. The ones that are the effects of our will are kind of weak and irregular, but then there's these other ones that are not the effects of our will, and those are strong and regular. And those are the ones we call real. So, when a bunch of ideas that we've collected together and given a single name, like the name apple or snowball or whatever, when they occur as part of this series of strong, regular ideas not subject to my will, that's when I say there's a real apple or there's a real snowball. It's just a group of ideas in my mind, just like an imaginary snowball or apple is just a group of ideas in my mind. But it's a strong, regular, involuntary group of ideas in my mind. And that's why I call it a thing, in the narrow sense, something real and not imaginary. And of course, the explanation for this is going to be, for all three of these characteristics, is going to be, what are these strong, regular ideas the effect of, if not of my will? They're the effect of the divine will. Right? So they're stronger and more regular because they have a more powerful and wise will behind them. Okay, so now I'm going to, let me actually stop and ask if there are questions about that. There have been no questions recently, and I don't know why that is. But there are 22 participants. So someone's, well, actually, I don't know if you're listening, but why would you do that? Like, my kids know all these tricks. Like they say, like you can change your name to connecting to audio. By the way, I just remembered, they changed my name to something.
No, we didn't change it.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay. You sure?
Yeah.
All right. They threatened to change my name to something.
No, I did not.
Okay.
Alana said, I want to change the name. And then I said, that means that whenever you start a class, your name's going to be that.
I thought that's why you wanted to do it. All right.
I
Anyway.
want to keep it.
All right. Well, yeah. So, but there's no point in doing that here because I'm not taking attendance and I don't even know who's participating. I just know it's 22 participants. Anyway, sorry. So,
Yes.
Okay. I'm just very thorough. Oh, that's hard to believe. I think I'm pretty unclear, but maybe just not clear enough for you to even formulate a question. All right. Anyway, so all right. So now I want to enter into something it's kind of a digression. This digression might be the rest of the lecture, though, considering what time it is. But it's only kind of a digression, and you'll see why when I say what it is. So the question is, according to Berkeley, do things exist because they're perceived by God? So this possibility is first raised in section 6 of part 1 on page 25. He's talking about when the whole choir of heaven and the furniture of the earth actually exist. And he says that they have not any subsistence without a mind, that their being is to be perceived or known, that consequently, so long as they are not actually perceived by me, or do not exist in my mind, or that of any other created spirit, they must either have no existence at all, or else subsist in the mind of some eternal spirit. This possibility is, right, so the possibility for a thing existing, like, let's say, this whiteboard When does it exist? Oh, I wrote that in a way you couldn't read it, didn't I? Oops. See, I'm worried even if I move the camera. Oh, this is so annoying. Oh, I see this guy. That didn't help. Well, you didn't quite see all of God now, but you see most of it. Do things exist because they're perceived by God is the question. Right? So the three alternatives that he presents, when I say this whiteboard exists, what could I mean? Either it exists in my mind, that is, it's perceived by me, or it exists in the mind of some other created spirit, that is, it's perceived by some other finite thing, or it subsists in an eternal mind, that is, God perceives it. And he hints at this possibility even more strongly later in section 48, on page 41, where he's dealing with the objection that it seems ridiculous to say that every time I close my eyes, all the things in the room, that is, I guess, all the visible things in the visible room, that is, because the tangible things in the tangible room don't disappear when I close my eyes. But anyway, every time I close my eyes, all the things in the room are annihilated. And then when I open them, they come into existence from nothing again. That sounds absurd. And first he has some argument why it's not so absurd as you might have thought. But then he says, for though we hold indeed the objects of sense to be nothing else but ideas which cannot exist unperceived, yet we may not hence conclude that they have no existence except only while they are perceived by us, since there may be some other spirit that perceives them, though we do not. Right, so if that's supposed to answer the objection, we want to say that not only could there sometimes be another spirit that perceives them when we do not, right? So like if we're all in the room and just I close my eyes, I could say, well, the things in the room still exist because they perceive them. But then when everyone else leaves, I'm back in the same problem again. There has to be some spirit that always perceives them, and who would that be? That would be God. So it sounds like he doesn't anywhere in the principles actually assert that. The two places I've given are the two places where he suggests it as a possibility to calm your anxieties about how weird this view is, basically. There's a place in the dialogues between Hylas and Philoneus, where he has Philoneus, who's his spokesperson, assert this a little bit more firmly, maybe, but look in the context there, it's not so clear what it means. So anyway, so I'll say like the textual basis for this is not that strong, and yet it's pretty much usually attributed to Berkeley. In fact, it's like pretty much usually the only thing people think about Berkeley. So I don't know if you ever see, there's this web comic called Existential Comics, where the joke is that every week a bunch of famous philosophers are shown talking to each other usually about some ordinary situation, but they're all saying whatever thing is the one thing everyone knows that philosopher always says. So the one thing Berkeley will always say in existential comics is that, it doesn't matter because the table only exists when God perceives it, or, something like that. So this is pretty much like official Berkeley view. However, my feeling is that he couldn't possibly be serious about it. So I'm going to try to show that in whatever time is left. I doubt I'm the first one to say this about Berkeley, but I'm not familiar with the Berkeley literature, and I don't have plans to be, so I don't know who else might have said it. But I'm going to tell you it. So the first question is, what purpose would it serve for God to have these ideas? Right, so here's the view we're supposed to be imagining. So, like, I don't know, here's this table. Well, see, that's not what it is. So here I am, this is my mind. And in it, sometimes, is an idea that looks like this. It's important to remember that according to Berkeley, it's not that I have an idea of a table in my mind. It's the idea in my mind is the table. Right? So like if tables are big and hard and colorful and can hold lots of stuff and you have to pay money to get them and whatever, that means there's an idea in my mind that's big and hard and colorful and can hold lots of stuff, etc. So that's what's in my mind, this idea that is a table. But then other times when I look the other direction and I'm not feeling it or smelling it or anything, there is no idea like that in my mind. So here's situation 2, it's gone. But then if I turn around again or go back into the room or, whatever, poof, there's the idea again. So it seems like there's a table, and then there isn't a table, and then there is a table. Now, so to explain in what sense the table always exists, we're supposed to say that this whole time there was an idea. Well, of course, it wasn't this idea, because this idea was in my mind, but it was an idea just like this idea, I guess, in God's mind the whole time. Okay, someone asked, so Berkeley's argument was that if he closes his eyes, then everything ceases to exist for him. But since everything still does exist outside of that, that means it's being perceived by God. So that's, again, is the view that people always attribute to Berkeley, and I'm trying to claim that although he says things that suggest that in some places, he doesn't really mean that. Well, thank you. All right. So, right, so that's why first of all, this is why you should not read existential comics. Most of the things those philosophers say in existential comics are not what they actually thought, but what everyone always thinks they thought. Besides which, it's usually not very funny. But never mind that. I guess tastes differ. Maybe you think it's funny and then you can read it. All right. Right. So my question. So this is what I'm going to claim is not Berkeley's view, but it is the view that's being attributed to Berkeley here. So my question is, why? What's the good of God having this idea? Well, you might ask, what's the good of us having ideas? Like, what's the good of me having this idea? Does it make me do something? No, because Berkeley says ideas are absolutely inert. They have no active power. So the idea can't make me do something. So what good is it? Well, the good of it is basically this, that this idea in my mind is a sign which is syntactically related to other ideas in a divine language. and when I say in a divine language, I mean that these syntactic rules are are constituted by the divine will. And so, for example, one of the syntactic rules is that if this idea exists in my mind, and then I have certain other ideas / cause certain other ideas in my mind, which we call walking over and doing this, there'll be an idea that's painful. Right? Or in other words, as we would ordinarily say, seeing a table is a warning that if you walk over and hit it like this with your head, it will hurt. So having these ideas, even though they don't do anything, is useful for the purpose of us doing something, because Berkeley, well, he doesn't talk about that much in this book. Maybe he would have talked about it in part 2. But he pretty much seems to agree with Locke that what we're doing is seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, right? So that's what spirits are doing. That's what their will is for, so to speak. And so given that, it's very useful to have this sign from God so that I know, given this sign, I know that pain and pleasure will follow from certain different trains of events, and I can use my powers as an active spirit to choose one or the other. How exactly that works, I'm not sure Berkeley explains anywhere in detail, but it's something about causing these imaginary ideas and then being assured that because I imagine moving my arm, they actually will move. That is, again, it's like a syntactic relationship that God has established that gives me a kind of lever to move real ideas. All I have to do is produce in my mind the imaginary idea of my arm moving, maybe with a certain feeling of desire or something like that. And then sure enough, all the real ideas that constitute my real arm actually moving will come into my mind. So I can control my actions, and this sign is very useful to me in controlling my actions because it tells me whether pleasure or pain is coming, depending on what I do. But what does God need this for? God doesn't need a bunch of signs in order to track his own will, to predict his own will. And if you are not so sure about that, Berkeley pretty much says this on page 52. Now, it's true that at this point, he's not talking about this picture that I drew on the board, which you now can't see, but about a slightly different picture. Maybe I should switch back to the board for a second. Oh, there's only 4 more minutes left. He's objecting to a slightly different picture where the ideas that are in God's mind are nothing like the ideas in my mind, but they, when God gets a certain unknown idea in his mind, he causes the table idea in my mind. Okay, so that's different from the view that's being attributed to Berkeley, but still, I think this objection that Berkeley makes applies to both. On the part of an all-sufficient spirit, what can there be that should make us believe, or even suspect, he is directed by an inert occasion to excite ideas in our minds? Right? Why does he need little notes to remind himself what ideas to excite in our minds? It's all the product of his own will. So that's kind of that's an argument like some of the arguments Berkeley makes against matter, which doesn't so much show that God perceiving things when we're not is impossible, but it just seems to show that it is useless. And therefore, at least as Berkeley would say, we have no reason to suppose this. But I think there's something worse for this view, which is what do we think that God perceives? So again, as I said, the idea in God's mind is not numerically the same as the idea in my mind, right? One is a mode of one substance, and the other is a mode of another substance. Well, I guess you could say, but at least it must be kind of similar to the idea in your mind, right? And, you know, like an idea can be like another idea, right? Like, for example, suppose we turn off the lights. What color is the table that God sees? Is it black? Because the table I see is black because it's dark now. Or is it still whatever color the table was before? Or is it both? Or neither? So, I mean, that's a kind of a puzzle, but it's not that bad as long as it's just secondary qualities. Maybe you could say, well, this would be getting back a lot closer to Locke, however. You could say, well, yeah, the table doesn't really have a color. That's relative to us. But what God perceives is like the shape and size of the table. But the thing is, Berkeley, in his own argument against Locke on this very point, says, look, just as different people don't necessarily see the same color or feel the same temperature, eyes in different places don't see the same figure or size either. Right? And, you know, he goes through this whole argument of how if I, so to speak, could get closer and closer to the table and see it more and more accurately, its shape would keep changing, right? Because what looks like a smooth edge from far away, if you look at it more closely, it turns out to have little bumps in it. And what is its real shape? What shape does God perceive when I'm not looking at it with any eyes? Or what shape does God perceive when I'm not looking at it and another being with more accurate eyes is also not looking at it? Which one still exists? They're different ideas. They're different, and they're not even like in one-to-one correspondence with each other in some simple way, right? This one has parts that are different from each other that don't correspond to anything in this one. So they're really completely different ideas. And if you wanted to say that God sees the table with infinite accuracy, Berkeley considers that to be a reductio ad absurdum, right? Because he says that at that point the table would be, or the shape would be infinitely large, and therefore would have no boundary and no shape at all, right? So God would perceive no figures. So when I close my eyes, sure enough, all shapes would disappear anyway. So the most you can say, and this does not sound very commonsensical, nor does it sound much better than the things he makes fun of in Locke, is that God perceives like kind of an infinite array of inconsistent worlds all the time. The worlds that would be seen by all the different and sensed by all the different sense organs there are or could be. And that's the sense in which this table that I see still exists when I close my eyes. In other words, what still exists when I close my eyes is nothing at all like what exists when I open my eyes. So I'm sorry, I'm already 3 minutes over, or else I would say more about this, but instead I will just say goodbye, and I'll see you next time.